He was 16 when the state finally gave up on him, and what he found on a forgotten piece of land would change not just his life, but the secret history of the entire valley. If you've ever felt like the world had written you off, stick around. This story is for you. And if it hits home, do me a favor and hit subscribe, because we're building a community here for people who've had to fight for every inch of ground they stand on. The day I turned 16 wasn't a day for cake or presents. It was a day for paperwork. I sat in a beige office that smelled of stale coffee and desperation, across from a man named Mr. Albright. He wasn't a bad guy, not really. He was just tired. The kind of tired you get from seeing too many kids like me pass through the system, their futures looking like a long gray road with no signs. He slid a thin manila folder across the desk. My name was on it, typed in a faded font. Leo Gable. "Leo," he said, his voice a low rumble of institutional sympathy. "As you know, you're transitioning out of the group home. You're 16, which, under the new state guidelines for your specific case, makes you eligible for independent placement." It was a gentle way of saying, "You're on your own." I'd been in the system since I was 6, ever since my grandmother Elena died. She was all I had. I remembered her in flashes, the smell of soil on her hands, the sound of her humming a song I couldn't recall, the rough texture of her wool coat. After she was gone, there was a blur of foster homes, each one a temporary stop, until I landed at the Northwood Group Home for Boys. 2 years of thin mattresses, scheduled meals, and the constant low-grade hum of other people's anger. 2 years of learning to make myself small, to be invisible. Independent placement, I repeated. The words felt hollow. They meant a cot at a youth shelter downtown until I turned 18, a voucher for fast food, and a list of job agencies that mostly led to dead ends. "There's also this," Mr. Albright said, pushing a smaller, thicker envelope toward me. It was old, the paper yellowed and soft at the edges. "This was in your file, from your grandmother's estate. It's not much, I'm afraid, mostly personal effects, but there's a deed." I picked it up. The envelope was heavy, sealed with brittle, browning tape. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a small velvet pouch containing a single ornate brass key, tarnished with age. There was a photograph of a woman I barely recognized as my grandmother, standing in front of a strange, curved metal building, squinting into the sun. And there was a folded document, a property deed. It described a 5-acre plot of land in a place called Havenwood County, a few hours north. The property owner was listed as Elena Gable, but there was another, more recent document stapled to it, a notice of tax delinquency. The property had been seized by the county. "The back taxes were never paid after she passed," Mr. Albright explained, peering at the paper. "It's been sitting in county holding for years. According to this notice, the final reclamation period is about to expire. Tomorrow, in fact. After that, it goes to public auction." He sighed. "I'm sorry, son. It's likely worth nothing. Probably just a patch of weeds. But it's yours, if you can claim it." I looked at the final line on the delinquency notice. To reclaim the property, the legal heir had to pay the accumulated administrative fees. The amount was $7. $7. For 5 acres of land and a weird metal building. It sounded like a joke, a cruel punchline to a decade of being told I had nothing and would amount to nothing. But in that moment, looking at the picture of my grandmother, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years ignited inside me. It wasn't quite hope. It was more like defiance. "How do I get there?" I asked. Mr. Albright blinked, surprised I was even considering it. He drew a map on the back of a napkin, a bus route to a town called Oakhaven, and then a long walk. He gave me my final stipend, $150 in cash, meant to last me a month. He shook my hand, his grip firm but impersonal, and wished me luck. An hour later, I was standing on a dusty curb with a backpack containing my entire life. 3 t-shirts, a pair of jeans, a toothbrush, and a yellowed envelope. I had $98 left after the bus ticket, and a key to a place I'd never seen. The bus ride was a long, rattling journey out of the city's concrete heart and into the green, rolling hills of the countryside. I watched the strip malls and apartment blocks give way to fields and forests, the air growing cleaner with every mile. The other passengers were a quiet, weary collection of souls, each lost in their own thoughts. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. For the first time in 10 years, no one was telling me where to be or what to do. The fear was there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a thrilling, terrifying sense of freedom. I was heading towards something that was mine. Even if it was just a patch of weeds, it was mine. I got off in Oakhaven. It wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a gas station, a diner, and a small brick building that housed the county clerk's office. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Following Mr. Albright's crude map, I walked into the clerk's office. A bell chimed softly. Behind a high wooden counter sat a woman with kind eyes and hair the color of steel wool pulled back in a loose bun. Her name tag read Martha. She looked up from a large, leather-bound book. "Can I help you, hon?" I slid the deed and the delinquency notice onto the counter. "I'm here to claim this property," I said, my voice sounding younger and thinner than I wanted. "I'm Leo Gable. Elena Gable was my grandmother." Martha studied the documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. She adjusted her glasses, her gaze shifting from the papers to my face and back again. A flicker of recognition, or maybe pity, crossed her face. "Gable," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "I remember Elena. She was a fighter." She tapped a long, painted fingernail on the notice. "You're just in time. This was set for the auction block tomorrow morning. Pioneer Holdings has had its eye on this parcel for a while." "Pioneer Holdings?" "Big development company," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Been buying up everything around here. They want to put in a golf course and luxury cabins. A lot of folks have sold. Some haven't had a choice." She looked at me again, her expression softening. "Your grandmother was one of the holdouts. She loved that land." She stood up and walked over to a massive filing cabinet. $7 is the fee. Do you have it?" I carefully counted out 7 wrinkled $1 bills and laid them on the counter. It felt like the most important transaction of my life. Martha took the money, rang it up in an ancient cash register, and then began the slow, methodical process of stamping documents. The rhythmic thud of the stamp was the sound of ownership, of a future I hadn't known existed an hour ago. "All right, Leo Gable," she said, sliding the newly stamped deed back to me. "It's yours, free and clear." She handed me a set of printed directions. "It's about a 5-mile walk from here, down Ridge Road. You can't miss the Quonset. It's the only thing out there." She paused, a worried look on her face. "You got a place to stay tonight? It's supposed to get cold." "I do now," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. She gave me a long, searching look, then nodded slowly. "Your grandmother was a good woman, stubborn as a mule, but good. She wouldn't want you out there with nothing." She reached under the counter and pulled out a heavy wool blanket and a small bag. "Here, some apples and a thermos of hot coffee. Don't argue." I didn't. I took them, my throat tight with an emotion I couldn't name. It had been years since anyone had shown me that kind of simple, unquestioning kindness. "Thank you," I whispered. "You take care of yourself," she said, "and be careful. That land, it has history." The walk was longer than I expected. The paved road turned to gravel, and then to a rutted dirt track that wound its way deeper into the woods. The sun began to dip below the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air grew cold, and I was grateful for Martha's blanket, which I draped over my shoulders. Just as the last light was fading, I saw it. Tucked into a small clearing, surrounded by towering pine trees, was a long, curved building of corrugated metal, its surface rusted to a deep, earthy red. A Quonset hut, just like in the photograph. It was bigger than I'd imagined, and more dilapidated. A few of the metal panels were dented, and weeds grew thick around its base. But it was standing. It was real. I walked to the front, where a single, heavy metal door was set into the structure. A large, rusty padlock held it shut. I pulled the old brass key from my pocket. It slid into the lock with a grating sound. For a moment, it wouldn't turn. I felt a surge of panic. What if it was the wrong key? What if this was all a mistake? I took a deep breath, jiggled it, and pushed harder. With a loud, protesting clank, the lock sprang open. I pulled the heavy door open. It groaned on its hinges, the sound echoing in the silent woods. The air that billowed out was cold and musty, smelling of dust, damp earth, and something else. Something that smelled like time itself. I stepped inside, pulling a small flashlight from my backpack. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a vast, cavernous space. The curved ceiling soared high above me. The floor was concrete, cracked and uneven. Dust motes danced in the light. Against one wall was a simple wooden workbench, covered in old tools and cobwebs. In the center of the room was a cast-iron wood stove, a stack of firewood neatly piled beside it. And in the far corner, covered by a heavy canvas tarp, was a small cot, a wooden crate that served as a nightstand, and a stack of books. It wasn't much. It was cold and dark and lonely. But as I stood there in the center of that strange metal half-cylinder, a profound sense of peace washed over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't in a room that belonged to someone else. I wasn't a temporary guest. I was home. That first night was a lesson in survival. I found a box of matches in the crate by the cot, and, after a few clumsy attempts, managed to get a fire going in the wood stove. The dry pine caught quickly, and soon a welcome warmth began to push back the damp chill. I ate one of Martha's apples, its crisp sweetness a welcome change from the bland, starchy food of the group home. I unrolled my sleeping bag on the cot, pulling the wool blanket over me. The fire crackled and popped, casting flickering shadows on the curved walls. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, and an owl hooted in the distance. I lay awake for a long time, staring up into the darkness. I thought about my grandmother, Elena. I tried to picture her living here, in this stark metal shell. Why would she choose a place like this? Martha had called her a fighter. What was she fighting for? Or against? The questions swirled in my mind, unanswered. I felt a pang of resentment. If she loved this land so much, why had she let it go? Why had she left me with nothing but a $7 problem and a rusty key? I pushed the thought away. It was too heavy for my first night of freedom. I closed my eyes and listened to the fire, eventually drifting into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through a grimy window set high in the wall. The fire had died down to glowing embers. The air was frigid. I rekindled the flames and made a mental list of everything I needed to do. First, explore the property. Second, find a source of water. Third, figure out how I was going to eat. I had about $90 left. It would have to last. I spent the day walking the 5 acres. The land was beautiful, wild, and overgrown. The Quonset sat in a natural clearing, but behind it, the land sloped down into a dense forest of pine and oak. A small, clear stream cut through the property, solving my water problem. I found evidence of a long abandoned garden, the raised beds now choked with weeds. There was an old, collapsed structure that might have been a chicken coop. This place hadn't just been a shelter, it had been a homestead. My grandmother had worked this land. As I explored, I felt a growing sense of connection to her, a person who was more myth than memory to me. Every rotted fence post, every overgrown path was a trace of her existence. I was walking in her footsteps. But the feeling was tinged with unease. Martha's words about Pioneer Holdings echoed in my mind. Why did a big company want this specific, unremarkable patch of land so badly? Back inside the Quonset, I decided to do a more thorough search. I started with the workbench. It was covered in a thick layer of dust. I wiped it away, revealing a collection of old hand tools, hammers, saws, wrenches. They were well cared for, the wooden handles worn smooth with use. Underneath a pile of oil rags, I found a small metal lockbox. It was locked, of course. There was no key. I spent the better part of an hour trying to pry it open, my frustration mounting. Finally, I took one of the heavy hammers and smashed the lock. It broke with a satisfying crack. Inside wasn't money or jewelry. It was full of papers, old newspaper clippings mostly. The headlines all told a similar story. Pioneer Holdings announces new luxury development. Local residents protest land seizure. Environmental concerns raised over Havenwood project. The articles dated back 15 years. My grandmother had been collecting them. She had been tracking this company for a long, long time. At the bottom of the box, I found a thick, leather-bound journal. My grandmother's journal. My heart hammered in my chest. I opened it. The first page was dated 10 years ago, just a few weeks before she died. Her handwriting was a neat, elegant cursive, but the pressure of the pen on the paper suggested an urgency, a desperation. The entry began. Leo, if you are reading this, it means I have failed. It means the world has taken you from me, and I have left you to face this alone. I am so sorry. Please know that none of this was your fault. Everything I have done, every choice I have made, has been to protect you and to protect this land. They are one and the same. I had to stop reading. The words were a punch to the gut. All these years I had carried a secret, shameful belief that I was the reason my life had fallen apart, that I had been too much for her to handle. To see it written there, in her own hand, that she had been trying to protect me, it cracked open something deep inside me. I read on, my vision blurred with tears. She wrote about Pioneer Holdings, not as a faceless corporation, but as a predator. She described their tactics: lowball offers, legal intimidation, the exploitation of obscure zoning laws. They had forced her neighbors out, one by one, until she was the last one left. They think I'm just a stubborn old woman, she wrote. They don't understand. They see dirt and trees. I see a sanctuary. They see profit. I see a future for my grandson. Then the journal took a strange turn. She started writing about the land itself, not about its beauty, but about its geology. She mentioned water tables, underground springs, and a specific type of rock formation unique to the area. She wrote about a survey her husband, my grandfather, had conducted decades ago. He had been a geologist. "They don't know what's under their feet," she wrote in one frantic, underlined entry. "They can't know. If they find out, they will stop at nothing to get this land. They will poison the water for the entire valley. I have to make sure the evidence is safe. I have to hide it where they will never think to look." The last entry was short, written in a shaky hand. "The lawyers are circling. They have found a way to use the tax laws against me. I don't have the money to fight them in court anymore, so I will use their own system against them. I will let the land go, but not to them. I will let it go to the county, a temporary guardian. I will create a chain of title they cannot easily break. It will fall to you, Leo. You are the only one who can reclaim it. The fee will be small, a pittance, an insult to their greed. When you come back, the key will open the door. But the real legacy is not in the hut. It's beneath it. The floorboards in the northwest corner. Trust your grandfather's maps. Protect our home, Leo. Protect the water." I closed the journal, my mind reeling. My grandmother hadn't abandoned me. She hadn't been careless. She had orchestrated a desperate, brilliant legal gambit to save her home for me. She had sacrificed everything, including her reputation in my memory, on the long-shot hope that one day I would be old enough to understand and find my way back here. The weight of her love, her sacrifice, settled on me. It wasn't a burden, it was an anchor, and it came with a mission. The floorboards in the northwest corner. I walked to the corner of the Quonset she had indicated. The concrete floor was cracked and stained, but in one section it looked different. The cracks were more uniform, forming a rough rectangle about 6 feet by 4. I got on my hands and knees, running my fingers along the lines. It wasn't concrete. It was some kind of composite, painted to look like the rest of the floor. I searched for a handle, a seam, anything. There was nothing. I went back to the workbench and got a crowbar. I wedged the tip into one of the cracks and leaned on it with all my weight. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep groan, the panel lifted slightly. My heart pounded with a mixture of fear and excitement. I worked the crowbar around the edges, slowly prying the heavy panel up. It was incredibly heavy, reinforced with steel. Finally, I lifted it high enough to slide it aside. It crashed onto the floor with a deafening boom. I shone my flashlight into the opening. It revealed a dark, square hole. A ladder made of iron rebar was bolted to one side, descending into blackness. A cold, earthy smell wafted up. It was a cellar, a hidden bunker. And that's when it really began. That's when I understood that my grandmother hadn't just left me a home. She had left me a hiding place, a puzzle, and a fight. Have you ever discovered a secret that changed everything you thought you knew about your family, about your own life? It's a disorienting feeling, like the ground shifting beneath your feet. For me, standing at the edge of that dark hole, it was both terrifying and clarifying. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever had to dig for the truth, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Your stories matter. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. We're all in this together. Now, let's get back to what was waiting for me in the dark. My hands were shaking as I gripped the cold rungs of the ladder. The flashlight was clenched between my teeth, its beam cutting a shaky path into the darkness below. I descended one rung at a time, the musty air growing colder and damper with each step. The ladder went down about 10 feet, ending on a packed earth floor. I stepped off and swung the flashlight around. I was in a small, square room, no more than 10 feet by 10 feet. The walls were reinforced with thick wooden beams, and the air was still and silent. It was clear this space had been built with care and purpose. Against the far wall was a large, military-style footlocker made of dark green metal. It was secured with 2 heavy-duty latches. Next to it, leaning against the wall, was a long, rolled-up canvas tube tied with twine. I approached the footlocker first, my footsteps muffled by the soft earth. I knelt and tried the latches. They weren't locked, they were just stiff. I put all my strength into them, and they sprang open with a loud metallic snap. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, everything was meticulously organized and wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the damp. On top was a stack of folded papers. I picked them up. They were maps, my grandfather's geological surveys. They were incredibly detailed, drawn by hand with precise technical skill. They showed the entire Havenwood Valley, but they weren't focused on property lines or roads. They were focused on what was underground: aquifers, fault lines, mineral deposits. One map in particular caught my eye. It was a survey of my grandmother's 5 acres. It showed the stream, the location of the Quonset, and then, directly beneath it, a large, shaded area labeled Havenwood Deep Spring. A series of arrows and notations indicated that this spring was the primary source for the aquifer that fed the entire region. My grandfather had written a note in the margin: confluence point, exceptionally pure, but vulnerable to surface contamination, must be protected. Vulnerable to surface contamination. The phrase sent a chill down my spine. I thought about what Martha had said about Pioneer Holdings, their plans for a golf course. Golf courses used massive amounts of pesticides and fertilizers. If they built it here, right on top of this critical water source, they would poison the water for thousands of people. My grandmother hadn't just been protecting a piece of land. She had been protecting the lifeblood of the entire valley. I dug deeper into the trunk. Beneath the maps was a small handheld tape recorder and a box of microcassettes, each one neatly labeled with a date. I picked up the recorder. It was old, but it looked functional. I grabbed the first tape, labeled January 10th, 10 years ago, and pushed it into the machine. I pressed play. After a moment of static, a voice filled the small, silent bunker. It was my grandmother's voice. Not the faint, humming memory from my childhood, but a real voice. Clear, strong, and full of a weariness that broke my heart. "This is Elena Gable," she said. "This is my testimony. I am recording this because I know what Pioneer Holdings is capable of. I have tried to go through the proper channels. I have spoken to the EPA, the county commissioners, the local papers. No one will listen. They are blinded by the promise of jobs and tax revenue. They don't see the true cost." Her voice trembled with a quiet fury. My husband, Robert, discovered the importance of this spring 30 years ago. He tried to have the area designated as a protected watershed, but he died before he could complete the process. Pioneer knows, I am sure of it. I found one of their surveyors on my property last month, taking soil samples near the stream. He wasn't supposed to be here. When I confronted him, he ran. They are not just buying land. They are trying to acquire and bury the evidence of what they are about to do. I listened for over an hour, going through tape after tape. It was a comprehensive record of her one-woman war. She documented every phone call, every piece of registered mail she sent, every threat she received. She described cars parking on the road outside her property at night, just watching. She talked about finding her fences cut, her garden tools stolen. They were trying to intimidate her, to wear her down, to make her feel isolated and crazy. But she hadn't broken. She had just gone underground, literally. The final tape was the hardest to hear. Her voice was weak, strained. "I'm not well," she said, her breathing ragged. "The fight has taken its toll. I don't have much time. I've set my plan in motion. It's a terrible risk, Leo, leaving you. It feels like I am tearing out my own heart. But I have to believe that you will find your way back. I have to believe that you have my strength and your grandfather's integrity. The evidence is here, the maps, the recordings, and the water samples." I looked back in the trunk. At the very bottom were a dozen sealed glass vials filled with crystal-clear water, each labeled and dated. "Use them to prove what's at stake," her voice pleaded from the small speaker. "Don't let them erase this place. Don't let them trade our future for their greed. This land is your inheritance, Leo. Not the dirt, not the building. The responsibility. That is your inheritance." The tape clicked off. The silence that followed was immense, heavy with the weight of her last words. I sat there on the cold earth floor for a long time, the tape recorder clutched in my hand. I cried. I cried for the little boy who thought he'd been abandoned. I cried for the grandmother I barely knew, a woman who had fought a war in secret and died to give me a chance to finish it. And I cried for the terrifying, monumental task she had left me. I was 16 years old. I had $90 to my name. How was I supposed to take on a massive corporation? But as the grief washed over me, something else began to take its place. A cold, hard resolve. My grandmother had believed in me. She had trusted me. I wouldn't let her down. I had the evidence. I had the truth. Now I needed a fortress. I spent the next few days in a fever of activity. My first priority was to make the Quonset and the bunker more secure and livable. I used some of the old tools to repair the broken door hinge and reinforce the frame. I cleaned the grimy windows, letting in more light. I swept a decade's worth of dust and grime from the floor. I organized my grandmother's tools on the workbench, a strange sense of satisfaction coming from bringing order to the chaos. The Quonset began to feel less like a rusty shell and more like a workshop, a base of operations. My real focus, however, was the bunker. It was my sanctuary, the heart of my new life. It needed to be more than just a hole in the ground. I started by digging. Using an old spade I found in the hut, I began to expand the small room. The work was brutal. The earth was dense and rocky. Every shovelful was a struggle. My hands, soft from years of institutional life, were raw and blistered within hours. My back ached. My muscles screamed. But I kept digging. With every scoop of dirt, I felt like I was carving out my own space in the world, a place that no one could take from me. I wasn't just digging a bunker. I was digging roots. I worked from sunup to sundown, fueled by stale bread, creek water, and a burning sense of purpose. I hauled the dirt out in buckets and scattered it deep in the woods, careful not to leave a conspicuous pile. As I dug, I uncovered more of my grandmother's preparations. Tucked into a crawl space behind the wooden beams, I found a cache of preserved food. Dozens of cans of beans, vegetables, and soup, and several large sealed containers of rice and dried pasta. There was also a first aid kit, batteries, candles, and even a small hand-crank radio. She had prepared for a siege. She had prepared for me. The discovery was another wave of love from the past, a practical, nourishing gesture that brought fresh tears to my eyes. She hadn't just left me a fight. She had given me the tools to survive it. After 2 weeks of relentless labor, I had doubled the size of the bunker. I had one room for storage and another small space where I moved the cot. I ran a heavy-duty extension cord down from the Quonset, which I had managed to connect to a small portable generator I found, miraculously, in perfect condition and with a full tank of gas. I had light. I had a secure, hidden space where I could sleep, eat, and, most importantly, protect my grandfather's maps and my grandmother's testimony. During this time, I was careful. I walked into Oakhaven only once a week to buy supplies, paying with cash and speaking to as few people as possible. I always felt like I was being watched. I would see unfamiliar trucks parked on the side of Ridge Road, men in suits sitting inside, talking on their phones. They never approached me, but I knew who they were. Pioneer Holdings. They were waiting. They were watching the property, assuming that whoever had claimed it would eventually give up and sell for a pittance. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know what I had. One afternoon, as I was returning from town, I saw a sleek black car parked right at the entrance to my dirt track. A man in an expensive-looking suit got out. He was tall, with slicked-back gray hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Leo Gable?" he asked, his voice smooth and polished. I stopped, my hand tightening on the strap of my backpack. "Who's asking?" "My name is Arthur Vance. I'm a representative for Pioneer Holdings," he said, extending a hand. I didn't take it. "We were surprised to see this property had been reclaimed. We've been trying to acquire this final parcel for our Havenwood project for some time. I'm here to make you a very generous offer." He named a number that made my head spin. It was more money than I had ever imagined. Enough to go anywhere, do anything. Enough to leave this fight behind and start a new life, a comfortable life. For a fleeting second, I was tempted. The weight of my grandmother's legacy felt impossibly heavy. The thought of an easy way out was a siren's call. I looked at his polished shoes, standing on the dusty ground my grandmother had fought for. I thought of her voice on the tapes, the desperate plea to protect the water. I thought of the community downstream who had no idea their future was being negotiated on a dirt road by a 16-year-old and a man in a $1,000 suit. "The property is not for sale," I said, my voice steady. Vance's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Son, let's be realistic. This is a 5-acre plot of weeds with a tin can on it. You're a kid. What are you going to do with it? Our offer is more than fair. It's a life-changing amount of money. You should consider it carefully." "I have," I said. "The answer is no." His expression hardened. The friendly mask slipped, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. "We will acquire this land, Mr. Gable, one way or another. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. The hard way involves lawyers, courts, and eminent domain. It will be a long, expensive, and unpleasant process for you. In the end, we will win, and you will walk away with nothing." It was a declaration of war. He got back in his car, the tires spitting gravel as he drove away. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding. The fear was real, a cold dread that seeped into my bones. But my resolve was harder. They had underestimated my grandmother, And now they were underestimating me. They saw a kid. They didn't see the heir to a legacy of defiance. I went back to the Quonset and down into my bunker. I looked at the maps, the tapes, the water samples. This was my arsenal. Arthur Vance had his lawyers and his money. I had the truth. The question was, how could I make anyone listen? My grandmother had tried the official channels and failed. I needed a different approach. I needed allies. My first thought was Martha, the county clerk. She had been kind to me. She remembered my grandmother. She knew about Pioneer Holdings. The next day, I walked back to Oakhaven. I found her at her desk, just as before. "Martha," I said, my voice low, "I need your help. It's about my grandmother's land. It's about Pioneer Holdings." She looked up, her expression immediately serious. She glanced around the empty office. "Not here," she whispered. "Meet me at the diner after I close up. 5 o'clock. That evening, we sat in a worn vinyl booth at the back of the Oakhaven diner. I told her everything. I told her about the journal, the bunker, the maps, the tapes. I told her about Arthur Vance's visit, his offer, and his threat. I expected her to be shocked, maybe even disbelieving, but she just nodded slowly, a sad, knowing look in her eyes. "I knew it," she said softly. "I knew Elena was onto something. She used to come into the office, asking for old survey maps, water rights records. People thought she was eccentric, a crazy old woman obsessed with her land. But she was smart. She saw what was coming. "They're going to poison the water for the whole valley," I said. "We have to stop them." Martha took a long sip of her coffee. "Stopping them won't be easy, Leo. Pioneer has deep pockets. They have the best lawyers money can buy. They've got half the county commission in their pocket. A kid with a box of old tapes isn't going to scare them." My heart sank. "So, what do I do? Just give up?" "I didn't say that," she said, a spark of defiance in her eyes that reminded me of my grandmother. "I said it wouldn't be easy. You can't fight them head-on in a courtroom. You're right about that. Your grandmother already tried. We need to fight them in a different arena, the court of public opinion." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Pioneer is hosting a town hall meeting next week. They're going to present their final development plan and hold a public vote. It's mostly a formality, since they've already greased all the important wheels. But it's a public forum. They can't stop a citizen from speaking." She looked me straight in the eye. "You need to go to that meeting. You need to stand up and tell your grandmother's story. And you need to bring your evidence." The thought terrified me. Standing up in front of a crowd, speaking into a microphone, confronting these powerful people face to face. Everything in my life had taught me to be invisible, to stay silent. But my grandmother's voice echoed in my mind. "Protect our home." "I'll do it," I said. The week leading up to the town hall was the longest of my life. I spent my days preparing. I digitized the tapes. I took high-resolution photos of my grandfather's maps and my grandmother's journal entries. I compiled everything into a single, damning presentation on a cheap laptop I bought with the last of my money. My nights were spent in the bunker, rehearsing what I would say, my voice echoing in the small, subterranean space. I was terrified, but with each passing day, the fear was slowly being forged into a sharp, focused anger. The night of the meeting, the Oakhaven High School gymnasium was packed. It seemed like the entire town was there. On one side were the men in suits from Pioneer Holdings, including Arthur Vance, looking smug and confident. On the other side were the townspeople, farmers, small business owners, their faces a mixture of hope and skepticism. I saw Martha in the crowd. She gave me a small, encouraging nod. I sat in the back, my heart hammering against my ribs, my laptop bag clutched in my sweaty hands. The meeting began. Vance and his team presented a slick, glossy vision of the future. A beautiful golf course, luxury homes, a spa. They promised jobs, tourism, and a massive boost to the local economy. They talked about environmental responsibility, using phrases like sustainable development and eco-friendly design. It was a lie. A beautiful, well-packaged lie. When they finished, they opened the floor for questions. A few people stood up to ask about property taxes and construction noise. Then the moderator said, "We have time for one more." This was it. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely stand. I walked to the microphone in the center of the aisle. Every eye in the room turned to me. "My name is Leo Gable," I said, my voice shaking. "My grandmother was Elena Gable. Some of you may have known her." I saw a few older people in the audience nod. "For years, you were told she was a stubborn old woman who stood in the way of progress. Tonight, I'm here to tell you the truth." Arthur Vance's face went rigid. He started to stand up to protest, but I kept talking, my voice getting stronger with every word. I told them everything. I told them about my grandfather's discovery, about the Havenwood Deep Spring. I told them about my grandmother's fight, her warnings, and how she had been systematically ignored and intimidated. "Mr. Vance and Pioneer Holdings aren't just planning to build a golf course," I said, my voice ringing through the silent gym. "They are planning to build it on top of the source of every drop of water you drink, you cook with, you use to water your crops. They know this, and they have spent millions of dollars to hide it from you." A murmur went through the crowd. Vance was on his feet now, shouting at the moderator to cut me off. "This is slander. This boy is trespassing on our property. He has no right to be here." "This land is not your property," I shot back. "It's my home, and I have proof." I opened my laptop and connected it to the projector. My grandfather's map flashed onto the giant screen behind the stage, the location of the deep spring clearly marked. Then I played a clip from my grandmother's tapes. Her voice, clear and strong, filled the gymnasium. "They will poison the water for the entire valley," she said. The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. The faces of the townspeople were a mixture of shock and dawning horror. They were finally listening. I finished by displaying the last page of her journal, her final plea. "This isn't just about my land," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It's about all of us. It's about our water, our health, our future. My grandmother died fighting for it. I'm asking you to join me." I stepped away from the microphone. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, a single person started clapping. It was an old farmer in the front row. Then another person joined in, and another, until the entire room, minus the men in suits, was on its feet, the sound of their applause like thunder. Arthur Vance and his team stood there, their faces pale with rage and disbelief. Their beautiful, expensive lie had been shattered. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The town hall vote was overwhelmingly against Pioneer's proposal. The local news picked up the story, then the regional news. Environmental groups got involved. The state's EPA, embarrassed by the public outcry, launched a full-scale investigation into Pioneer Holdings and the Havenwood project. They used my grandfather's maps and the water samples from the bunker as their primary evidence. The legal battle was long and messy, but the truth was on our side. Pioneers' permits were revoked. They were hit with massive fines for failing to disclose the environmental risks. They pulled out of Havenwood County, their grand project in ruins. I didn't get rich. There was no big settlement. But I got something better. I got to keep my home. I got to honor my grandmother's legacy. And I was no longer alone. The people of Oakhaven, the people whose future I had helped protect, became my community. The old farmer who started the applause, a man named George, took me under his wing. He taught me how to properly tend the garden, how to fix the old generator, how to live on the land. Martha was a constant source of support and wisdom. I was no longer the invisible boy from the group home. I was Leo Gable, the kid who lived in the Quonset hut, the grandson of the woman who saved the valley. I'm 18 now. I still live in the Quonset. It's my fortress, my sanctuary. The bunker is still there, a quiet reminder of where this all began. Sometimes, late at night, I go down there and just sit in the silence, feeling the steady, solid earth around me. My grandmother left me a responsibility, and in fulfilling it, I found myself. I found a home, not just in a building, but in a community, in a purpose. She gave me a second chance, a life I never thought I could have. This whole journey started with $7 and a rusty key. It started with being kicked out and left with what the world considered nothing. But what I learned is that sometimes the things that look like endings are actually beginnings. Sometimes the things people throw away are the most valuable things of all. It's about having the courage to turn the key, to go down into the dark places, and to fight for the truth that you find there. So I want to ask you, what's the inheritance that was left for you? It might not be land or money. It might be a story, a value, a piece of wisdom, or a fight that someone else started. What are you going to do with it? Let me know in the comments. Your story is part of a larger one, and sharing it makes all of us stronger. Thank you for listening, and please, if you haven't yet, subscribe. There are more stories to tell.